Have you ever felt like if you just work harder, put in more hours in the studio, make more beautiful pieces, add more variety, that somehow something will finally click and success will come? I think most of us have been there at some point, at least I have, believing that the solution to our creative business problems is simply more. More production, more variety, more markets, more social media posts, more everything. But what if we've got it backwards? What if the path to actually thriving as a creative entrepreneur isn't about expanding in every direction, but actually about doing less? Deliberately narrowing our focus to find that magical intersection between a really specific thing that we love making and what a very unique audience desperately wants. It sounds simple when I say it like that, and maybe a little bit obvious. But the reality of actually doing it, of letting go of the fantasy that we can please everyone and make something for everyone, or, let's be honest, change our minds frequently so that we don't get bored ourselves. Not to mention the reality of potentially stepping away from some of the hands-on making that drew us to this practice in the first place. That's where this gets complicated. And maybe even a little bit painful. Today's conversation with Will Donovan of Donovan Pottery explores all of this tension. Will's journey from nearly abandoning ceramics entirely to building a six-figure fantasy-themed pottery business is a lesson in iteration. Not just of iterating products, but of business models and even definitions of success alongside what it actually means to be a potter in the first place. We get into so many practical aspects of this evolution. How Will went from making functional wear for restaurants to creating storied, inspired mugs for fantasy lovers. The moment a single social media post brought in 300 orders overnight on accident, and the difficult decision to partner with a production facility when his body just couldn't keep up with that kind of demand. Plus, how his decade at Clay Kings as their marketing coordinator gave him an unexpected education in e-commerce that became crucial to his own business success. Whether you're struggling to find your audience or wondering if you're allowed to pivot from what you originally thought your business should be, Will's experience reminds us that perhaps the most powerful skill we can develop isn't just making beautiful things. It's the courage to keep redefining what success looks like until we find a version that actually supports the life we want to live. So let's dig into this conversation about iteration, evolution, and ultimately giving yourself permission to change direction. Right after this quick word from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by The Community, your creative business support system with over 100 makers from around the world. With both the practical education you need to make a living from the things you make, found in our masterclasses on topics like finances, marketing, and SEO, plus the emotional support of fellow makers who truly understand what it's like to try and make a living from the things we make. It's like having both a business school designed specifically for artists and a team of colleagues who actually get what you're going through. But you don't have to take my word for it.
Hi, I'm Alicia Hagan in New Mexico. I joined the community last year after leaving my teaching career to pursue becoming a full-time artist. The community has been so invaluable in my growth as a solo artist because I still feel like I have coworkers and people I can talk to about my struggles and successes. The quarterly masterclasses always teach me something I didn't know I was even supposed to know. I also absolutely love going to the live co-working sessions and the book club meetups where I can hang out in real time with other makers from all around the world. It is awesome. You can find me and follow my journey on Instagram at Alicia Hagan Art.
If you want to learn more about community membership and support the creation of this podcast in the process, visit makersplaybook.com/community. Now, on with the show. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 14 years, Rebecca Ikes Cara. Hey, Will, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Rebecca. It's really good to be here.
We did
Thanks
it!
for having me. We're here.
Between each of our what's the word I'm looking for? Multi-passionate, multifaceted lives, I'm very impressed with us solidifying our calendars as quickly as we did.
You know, in the grand scope of things, it really did happen quite soon.
I mean, there have been times I've talked about this for months with people, if not a year. And so, like, we nailed this down pretty quickly. So
2 weeks.
before I keep just talking about scheduling, which nobody came to listen to, I'm going to have you introduce yourself so they know who the heck I'm talking to.
I'm glad to be here. My name is Will Donovan. I wear a number of different ceramic hats. The first one being I run Donovan Pottery. It's a online and local to Greenville, South Carolina pottery studio. We make story-inspired mugs to help people take a bit of inspiration from their fantasy loves into their everyday lives. We make primarily mugs, although we have a few other themed events and themed pots that we make for those, mostly mugs. The other hat I wear is Clay King. I've run their marketing and been their marketing coordinator director for 10 years coming up.
I didn't realize it'd been that long.
Yeah, I've been there a term. Clay King's really what helped solidify me in the ceramic space. There was a period of time after school, and we can get into this a little later, that I almost left ceramics completely, and Clay King really reeled me in. So I've been incredibly thankful to have them as part of my clay journey. And then the other hat we're wearing is trying to launch a ceramic studio, kind of a professional makerspace here in Greenville. We've got a pretty robust ceramics community and not a ton of options for those spaces or that community outside of like home studios or some beginner areas.
It's hard in general for potters across the area. It's easy to find community studios, and those are very special places that I'm sure are near and dear to many of our hearts. But as soon as you start to push slightly past that, the amount of infrastructure we all need to be studio potters is crazy demanding, like generally a pretty high barrier to entry cost-wise. And yet, if you're just getting started, that can be a scary leap. Like, it's exciting to me to hear from more people of creating shared spaces, but it is also like with the mindset of professionals sharing the space, separate from those communities.
Yeah, it has a lot of roadblocks and obstacles in the way. We're doing it in part out of the home studio that we're operating now. We have another business owner who works out of the space and produces. And there's been some challenges in figuring out, like, what does it look like to have two businesses operating out of the same space that have their own needs and time constraints and, you know, all the things that pottery business owners need. How's it function within just one nutshell? And we're learning.
Yep. Takes time. You know, actually, I was reminded of this just for myself the other day that, like, so this is like the third business effectively you would be a part of, the second one that you're building. And I think we personally might have a false sense of security of like, oh, I've built a business before, I know how to do this. And then you forget, like, it's a completely different thing every time.
It really is. It is like having a third kid. I've got two now, and the idea with the second one was, oh, we've done this once.
They're still
They
alive.
are very different. Yeah. But they are very different. They have their own needs and their own personalities and their own quirks. And you have to, find ways to adapt. And I think the longer I'm on this journey, the more I'm trying to, we talked about this a little earlier, kind of consolidate the hats I'm wearing into really just being maybe one or two. And I'm not too far away from that.
The thing that I'm reminded of is, like, especially when doing something, going from something like your own business to having a studio space where you're sharing and multiple people, on the surface, it sounds like more of the same, but in reality, It's a completely different situation. This was my experience with growing a team. It's like, oh, well, we'll just do more events. And it's like, actually, the marketing structure is completely different. How people are interested in actually working with you is completely different. Like, it's not more of the same at all.
No, it's really not. And there are personalities involved, and there is structure, and you have to be coordinated. And so I'm realizing as I'm building a team, growing a business, that the skills that I thought I would need to be a good potter and have good pots and sell pots is completely different from the skill sets I actually need. I'm coming off a week where we've had to have two like pretty challenging conversations. I'm typically a more passive, like I won't say passive, but I'm anti-confrontational, or at least learning how to deal with confrontation or expectations in a way that is conducive and like growth oriented, not reprimand oriented. I'm just figuring it out bit by bit and trying to have grace with myself. But yeah, the skill sets required are very different to getting past like just the solo operator.
Managing people, I think, was one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Hmm.
Because it's also not something any of us ever had training in to do.
No.
It's also something that you have to be really careful with legally speaking, to be frank. Like, you can't just be like, this isn't working, you're fired. Like, that's not how that works. And you get close with people. I mean, presumably, we're both decent humans. Like, you don't want to be cruel or mean, but you also have certain needs. The business has needs that have to be met. And it's like you're trying to be someone's friend, but you're also their boss. And
It's a tightrope.
Mhm.
You have to get good at balancing.
Yep. Well, I've just jumped us to present day. And you alluded
Okay.
to a little bit of coming out of school and everything that happened with your partnership with Clay Kings. So let's back up a little bit and give some insight into what that trajectory has been. Did you go to school for ceramics?
I did. Well, I didn't start with ceramics. I was really unfocused entering school. I came from a very private, small, conservative Christian high school that didn't have any extracurriculars or fine arts outside of like handbells and choir. So no visual stuff. And leaving that environment, coming into a new school a few hours away from my home, I wanted to kind of capture some sense of control over the direction of my life that I saw it at that time. And I had always been interested in artistic expression. I saw the adults around me live pretty non-creative lives or pursue things that were for others. And I didn't, I mean, this could have been a bit of naivety as just a teenager, but I didn't see the value add to either society or self in a way that really was desirous. So I wanted to reclaim a sense of control over my direction. And I switched my major from business to art the day before classes started. And I just took all the electives. I was like, this is an area I have an interest. I'm just going to pursue it. And it wasn't until sophomore year that I took a clay class and just fell in love. It was, I mean, this is a ceramics podcast. I'm sure everybody who's been on says like, I just got the bug. And so we don't have to go too deep there, but
Apparently, there's a very addictive drug blended into all of our clay. Whether you get it from Laguna or Kentucky Mudworks or wherever you get it from,
yeah,
there's like, I don't know, cocaine in it or something.
it has to be. Whoever's blending these clay mixes is spiking it. Leaving school, maybe we can compress that timeline. I took all the clay classes. I zoomed through all the ceramics programs. I quickly decided like, hey, I'm getting positive feedback for this skill that I'm developing. This is really fun. It is, I get to play with mud and fire and make stuff that's useful, not just to me, but others. So I was very positively reinforced to pursue clay, at least at that time. And then leaving school quickly was met with the reality that that's very difficult. This is a medium that has a pretty high bar of entry. And where I was at the time, there wasn't a lot of resources, even within like our community, to be able to do that. So one of my professors, bless him, kind of saw the spark and the passion there. He had a home studio. He also had a very big yard. And he said, hey, I don't want to mow this yard, and I don't use this studio very often. So would you mow it, and in exchange, I'll give you space. So I jumped at that.
Also, mowing a yard is way better than being like a studio tech.
Yeah.
Like, that's a much nicer barter.
It was, I mean, it was a big yard, but it was I think I got the better end of the deal in the long run. So I stayed in his studio probably longer than he originally thought, though we worked really well together. I was there for 2 years. And during that time, I just struggled. I was trying to figure out what my role was within the art space post-graduation, there was little art opportunities, even in a city that's known for art opportunities. It was still pretty barren, at least in the stage that I was in. And so I really almost fell out. I had gotten a job, cycled through construction work and manufacturing work. I assembled the hatches on BMW. So there's a BMW plant here. So if you drive a X3 or X4 between like 2015 and 2017, there's a high chance my fingerprints are somewhere on the trunk of that car.
Also, there's a low chance of how many potters drive BMWs, but
That's fair.
I'm projecting.
Maybe there's maybe a handful.
Could be. People have spouses with reliable jobs.
Yeah,
It happens.
But it was so difficult during that season. I was trying my darndest to stay in the studio as much as I could and find an audience of people who wanted to buy the experiments that I was creating. And it just was, I had success in bits and pieces, but definitely not enough to support a family that was growing. I had married right after college, and yeah, it was a struggle. My wife is a teacher, so income was it was reliant on me, and I was trying to force ceramics to be that income. And at that stage, it just wasn't happening. So I was learning German. I was very gung-ho on just like, I'm going to jump into BMW because there's career path here. And it was right after my 90 days when I had gotten signed on for insurance and like the full-time work eligibility, got all the official offers and things.
I was gonna just briefly clarify for people not in the U.S. You have to be at a job longer than 90 days to get all the things that you hear me talk so often about on the podcast, i.e., healthcare.
Yes, exactly.
It's not day one. Yep.
So I had just received that offer when I got a phone call from a guy named Chris Williams, and he said, "Hi, I'm Chris. I run Clay King in Spartanburg. I saw your resume online, and we're looking to hire a sales tech for Clay King." I had never heard of Clay King. I lived 40 miles away from them, and I had never been to the store. I'd never shopped online. I had little to no idea about what they were, who they were, but it was in the clay space, and I thought, well, I had kind of just signed on with the BMW track of life and given ceramics up as a wash, but sure, we'll give this a shot. I go in for the interview, and actually I turned down the role for the first time. I was like, I'm this done with clay. That track is dead. So I turned it down, and it was 2 months later, he called me back and he said, "Hey, the person we hired to fill that role didn't really work out. So do you want a second shot at this?" And at that point in time, I was missing clay and thought, okay, this is a second opportunity. This has come along. Let's do this.
I'm totally going to interrupt you because I'm like,
Please.
As a person, so this was, you said 10 years ago, so we're like roughly 2015-ish.
Yeah, that'd be about right.
Cool. I'm just thinking of the short list of people who have ever been called back twice. Like, hey, are you sure you don't want this job?
Yeah, it would make sense for him to never have talked to me again.
It usually goes the other way around, where you as the job seeker are like, knock, knock, knock. Hi, I'm still here. Knock, knock, knock. Like the greasy wheel situation. And so you said it was a sales position, not as much of the marketing side that you're in now?
Yeah, customer service and sales.
Okay. Because I was also just trying to think of like, was there a mentor who referred you to them, or how he connected with you to think like, hey, you're right for this job?
To this day, have not asked him how he found me. I did not know my resume was online. I wasn't looking for a job. I don't know how he got my number.
Well, part
Probably
2
should clarify
podcast episode is just been scheduled.
Okay. I'll find that information out and I'll report back.
Well, I'm just, as a person who graduated school in 2009 and literally could not get a job, all the things that you were supposed to do, 4.0, internships, extracurriculars, volunteer work, yada, yada, yada. And at the time, because of a myriad of reasons that were outside of all of our control, people just weren't hiring. That's what the economy was at the time. And so you were the ones like scratching at the doors, trying to get people to pay attention to you. So I am just mind-boggled by this entire experience.
Well, and I don't want to paint a picture that says, oh, Will Donovan was very desirable. I was knocking on doors. Like I was trying desperately for a long time to find an arts related job, thinking that that's what I had to do out of college. I have an art degree, let's use it. And it just wasn't working. And I think I was just so burnt out by that point that I was like, I'm done. I don't want to deal with this. This, from the outside, Clay King looked like a very mom and pop little warehouse. And I didn't have the understanding of their scope and their reach. But then once I got inside, that became clear.
So did you overlap your work with BMW with Clay Kings for a while and did both, or just took the risk?
No, I just quit.
All right.
Yep. I just went full send.
Amazing. Keep going.
So I joined probably, that'd been 2016, February, and worked as customer service, tech support, sales. I mean, it's a small team. People think Clay King is big because we ship all over and we have all the things in stock, but it is a very small, intimate group of people. And there's not many of us. It's probably at max 15, but most of the time it's about 12.
There's an entire offshoot conversation here to be had with how the efficiencies that they must have to ship in the time that they do with this few people. Because when you say 15 people, that's not 15 people on the floor ready to pack up something as soon as you place an order.
I'll be clear. If it's not equipment, there's 2 people that are responsible. I mean, we'll say 3. We'll say 3, but really 2.
They do get sleep, right? Because that's my primary.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. I don't know how much, but no, they do a really fantastic job.
It's incredible. But that's a whole nother conversation.
So I stayed at Clay King and I still didn't have a studio of my own. We had just bought a house that had a building that I was slowly converting into a studio. Just having access to used equipment, returned wheels, glazes that were on discount. Like I was able to start acquiring the things that would be needed to start my own practice. I bought a kiln that was returned because it had a scratch in the control panel. My wheel was a discontinued model that we had in the warehouse for a few years. So I was really blessed by the opportunity to acquire things at a reasonable rate and then just have a support system around me of learning in an environment of creators or potters, because they really do hire potters. It's not like they are bringing people in off the street that don't have an awareness of the craft. They are doing their best to make sure that everyone in there has an understanding of how things are used. So it wasn't just the internal support system, but also I was on the phones. I answered so many calls because that's one of the things that they offer is just, if you have a question, you can call and you can talk to somebody who knows the things and they'll help you. So I was on the phone probably all day for the better part of 7 or 8 years of just talking to potters. And the amount of just information and perspective that comes from that many conversations with potters about setting up a studio. These are the things you need. This is how my business runs. So this is how my business runs. Gave me a level of insight into what it would take to start my own home studio that I felt like I had a good launch point from Clay King, just being in that environment. And then when I wasn't on calls, they had a library of books and I used the computer. I was desk bound. So I just went through, took notes, and kind of stayed up to date on Clay stuff as best I could in between phone calls. I did not start in any kind of marketing capacity, probably for the first 4 years. Actually, the position I took over was replacing a girl who misused a Clay King Facebook account for personal benefit. So it was me personally and the company at large was very hesitant to start any kind of external marketing methods. And it was just over the course of a few years that we said, well, I think maybe a social media account for Clay King. I think some of these other marketing trends would probably benefit us in some capacity. I could do it. And it was a long conversation of even just letting it happen. But eventually I just did it on my own. It wasn't a paid thing at first. I was still doing sales primarily and just popping a few pictures up when I could. But that quickly became a growth path where the more it became aware, the community engaged really well with that marketing channel and level of communication with a clay company. That seemed to be a really effective route to not only connect and build community, but also drive sales in a real and tangible way. And once that became apparent to top brass, that was the kind of the part of the transition into what I do full time now, which is marketing, coordinating all the social media stuff.
This is why I love open-ended questions, because I think if you asked, a dozen, 200 potters, just a random sampling of potters, who are on social media and aware of Clay Kings, like, do you think they, what their plan was or what have you? No one would believe you now in today's iteration of the hilarious stuff coming out of Clay King's social media that you had to convince them to let this happen. The fact that this was
Oh, it's a fight.
Maybe we won't ever do this. We don't need it. It's okay. Is hilarious now.
Right. But no, it was a fight. And I don't mean like a fight, like this has to happen. No, it's not going to happen. It was just I think this is valuable. We're not going to do this. Hey, I think this is valuable. All right, we'll try it. And then keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. And it's grown in its own iterations. Like we started very rudimentary. It was just pictures, then maybe some videos. Then, it was not what it is today. And that's okay. But yeah, it's just grown organically since. It wasn't until probably 3 or 4 years ago that switched to my kind of full-time capacity.
I'm not going to stick on Clay Kings the entire time because there are so many other stories to get to. But since we've mentioned that you had to prove the value for such a long time, I have to ask, was there how did the humor get approved? Because it is a very specific, you could be on social media like, hey, we have this, look at this glaze, very, very professional, very straightforward. But there are specific brands I think of that have really specific humor on the internet, and it works. And Clay Kings is one of them.
Thank you. No, I'm very pleased to hear you say that. Thank you. Honestly, sometimes I'll look back in the feed and figure out what was our first meme, like where did we first start incorporating humor? But I don't remember the exact post, but I do remember coming in the next day and our warehouse manager said, "What did you do?" And I'd done something, I didn't know what at the time, but some product that was in a meme just zipped out, like it just sold. And now the other part of the equation that not many people know about is when for years, Clay King had a very rudimentary website that functioned, but it did not communicate with any external platforms. So if I made a post on Facebook or Instagram, or if we did any kind of paid advertising, there was no metric to be able to track to see if this was actually effective. So we were flying blind for a lot of it. So the only way we could, and I'll also say the sales volume of the day-to-day was to the point that most of the stuff that we put out was indiscernible if it did have an impact. But I do remember the warehouse manager coming to say, like, what did you do? And because we saw like this whole product that never sells suddenly sold. And it was a joke post. I don't remember the exact one, but I think that was the first like iteration of, humor works in a marketing capacity, which of course would typically make sense because people remember the Super Bowl commercials that make them laugh. And it just slowly became that reinforcing belief system that like, this isn't, yes, it's silly, but it has a very structured purpose behind the silliness, and that's still being communicated and people find it valuable. It's just going from there. So we've kind of leaned into it.
This is maybe not a good admission if I'm like, hey, Clay Kings, come on the podcast. However, I'm transparent. I have never directly ordered anything from them, and I am sitting here talking about everything you do on the internet. So, like, to say it works is really obvious when it's even somebody who's not actively involved in the ecosystem, like in the purchasing cycle, if you will,
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Yeah. That's quickly when we seem to find that connect between like customer engagement, community building, and sales. Like all of it kind of centered around just creating a space that was kind of self-aware. Like, yeah, okay, we're selling pottery supplies, but clicking at the time didn't really produce anything of its own. So like what angle can we really like offer people beyond fast shipping and in-stock stuff that is made by other people who have their own accounts that are much more popular than ours? Like how can we stand out? And it was, we can do silly things. We can be kind of self-depreciating and community aware and commentate on those things and in a funny way. And that seemed to connect.
I'm also super fascinated, and I know we haven't gotten through the whole story, so maybe this will come to light if I was going to guess where your background outside of clay or other job experiences came from, knowing what I know about, as an outsider looking in of the trajectory of Donovan pottery and then what you're doing with Clay Kings, I would have assumed you either went to school for marketing or tech or like, I mean this as a word of encouragement for people who think like, oh, well, I didn't study this or I don't know that. And yet, like, between what you've done for Clay Kings and what you've done for Donovan pottery, which we'll get into, both of those, in my perspective, hinge around this knowledge of e-commerce, which is both marketing and technology blended together effectively, that isn't actually there from an art major who almost quit clay. I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, it is, no, not trained at all. I have since done a very rigorous self-apprenticeship in a lot of marketing methods. I might be, even though I have Donovan Pottery, which is a very story-based, fantasy kind of oriented brand, people might be surprised that I spend maybe just a fraction of my time in those stories and most of my time in marketing books, marketing podcasts, business podcasts. Like, it is probably boring from the...
This is why you and I get along so well. Our bookshelves probably look really similar.
The stories that I love that are meaningful to me are not where I spend most of my time.
Yeah. I would say that even outside of story, right? Like, it's embarrassing to think how little my hands are in clay or in paint or whatever, but I'm also a nerd who's just constantly consuming new education. So,
yeah, that's okay.
Right? This is why I'm like, Will gets me.
I think I do. I think I do.
So, continuing along, like, Clay Kings has figured out that social media is here to stay, and that works. Humor works. What point? I know that you had a post go like, where does Donovan Pottery fit in? You know, as you're building this studio on the side, working full time for Clay Kings, where does that kind of fit into everything that's happening?
Yeah. So meantime, my 5 to 9 was building Donovan Pottery. So I'd come home and it still is about an hour commute from Clay King to where I live. But I would come home, have family time, and kind of jump right out to the studio. And it was an effort I was still teaching myself what people wanted. I was still making functional wear. I was still spending my nights throwing mugs and oil bottles. And in that realm of things, it still felt like things were going very, very slowly. We would sell at local farmers markets. I was making for restaurants and doing all of the things that you think successful potters do. But I was trying to make pots that were appealing to everybody. And I wasn't really, I still felt a disconnect. Even if people liked the things that I was making and ordering the things I was making, I was quickly burning out because Clay King was full-time plus a 2-hour commute there and back. And I had my first son in 2017, second in 2020. And so things just quickly started to constrict. And it wasn't until probably 2000 and there is a different side track that plays into, we'll get to there in a little bit. But meanwhile, Clay King's happening. I'm building Donovan Pottery and figuring out all the ways to fail at how to grow a pottery business. And 2000, right before COVID, a community studio did open up in Greenville. So after some years, that came to fruition and they needed a studio manager and they kind of pulled me away from Clay King for a little bit. I was letting them, they came to pick up some clay. And I was kind of at that burnout capacity again. And we were just having conversation. And he said, have you ever thought of not working for yourself some or not working at Clay King in such a big way? And I just looked at him and I think he saw a bit of desire in my eyes of just that glazed over look of man, I wish. And then that turned into a conversation that said, hey, why don't you come help manage our studio and help us grow this community studio. They were only 2 miles from my house. So that was very desirable. My wife was then pregnant, and so I was trying to spend more time at home. So we had the conversation with Clay King, and they were very accommodating to say, we really appreciate everything you're doing marketing-wise now. We get that doesn't have to look like in office every day. And as long as you can juggle this, we'll work with you to, we'll drop you down to 3 days in office week. And you can spend the rest of the time at the studio and do your thing.
That's not exactly doing less.
No.
Just to clarify, like, okay, we saved 4 hours a week of
Yeah.
commuting
Mhm.
plus the work day, but we're adding a work day because you're helping start a community studio. Just cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
in hindsight, it wasn't less. It was different, and it was different in a good way. It did let me stay closer to home more days a week. I bought a bike and biked to work. That was nice. Immediately lost 20 pounds. It was great after being desperate. And yeah, but then for the next, 9 months, I got to grow a little community studio, kind of see the inner workings of, okay, this is what a e-commerce ceramic supply business looks like. This is what a home potter studio business looks like. And this is what a community kind of member class oriented studio looks like. And get to see like the behind inner workings of all of those was, I think in hindsight, actually really helpful. But that was a very enjoyable period of time, even though it was short lived, because then 9 months later, COVID and everything shut down. I was not let go, but hey, we don't have much for you. So I chose to not go back to Clay King full time. I chose to kind of stick it out with Donovan Pottery to see if like, okay, is this the impetus that I can begin leaning on my own craft to support a family that now has 2 kids and still not like be local? Because I mean, I think that was for a lot of people the point in time which they said, I want to spend more time at home, or I have to spend more time at home. So that was a track for me. And I had really no choice and a lot of time, but to pour now into my own studio, my own work, and with more attention than I had been able to give it in the past. And it was also at that point that I had gotten really tired of making things for other people and decided that I'm going to start making things that I like. And if somebody likes that, okay. I wasn't relying per se on the income from Donovan Pottery at that point in time. So I was like, I have a window of play that I think this is going to be manageable. So I had always liked to draw. I had always liked to incorporate some level of humor or like external story values. I was feeling very nervous and scared about the future. And so I think I just started drawing based on stories that I liked. I would try to represent like a little bit of a symbol from, I think at the time it was Lord of the Rings. I would find characters that I would like to model or values who exemplified values that I liked or needed in my day to day. And I was just making these things for me. So I would make mugs with a stylized just representation of a particular character with a short little quote that I could look at and say like, oh, okay, I can do this. They did it, I could do it. And I just made this for me, but I was still sharing on social media, and that seemed to be the thing that people also liked and connected with. And so it was not long after COVID that in making this new body of work that was really just for myself, that I seemed to find other people that also really enjoyed those things. And people were asking me, how can I buy these? And I was like, well, I guess I'll make a website. And so that was, I mean, I don't mean to kind of fast forward because there's a lot in that little short span of time that really fast tracked in a lot of ways. I mean, I had been making social media content. I knew how to, at that point, connect with people around a topic and a shared value system. So I just kind of channeled what was working with Clay King into Donovan Pottery and around this one particular mug style that I was creating, and let the algorithms do their thing. And one video went nuts, and it was a mistake actually, because I had no idea how to manage my own website, and I hadn't set an inventory cap on one particular mug that we made a video for. And I woke up the next morning to like 300 orders.
Oh my.
And I panicked. I had no idea what to do.
Because you were throwing them all on the wheel.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
And pulling all the handles. And I was just like, so I just made a follow-up video, and I emailed as many people as I could to say like, hey, this is the situation. And almost everybody was like really cool with that. They're like, hey, you're doing your thing. Like, we see you and we want the mug. So just do it when you can do it.
I love that. And I just want to pause on that for a minute, because I think for a lot of us, there is such a overwhelming fear of messing something up and either having to deal with really uncomfortable customer service situations, or I don't know, just nobody wants to like have an awkward conversation, or just any of the weirdness around like this was, something happened that wasn't supposed to happen, or I messed up in some ways. And so I just wanted to double down on anybody who was like half listening, moving in and out of their studio. It was fine. Everything was fine. I'm sure there was a couple of people who were like, "Meh, I want a refund," but a couple out of 300 is not a big deal.
Well, and it was, I mean, I was just as transparent as I could be. Like this, that was my only option was this is the situation. Thank you so much. It's going to be a little bit. And then through those conversations, mostly in the comment section, people were just saying, hey, can you show us more about what you're up to? And so we just story told the whole situation. And that really seemed to be the thing that not only got us like our first real customer base, but also like long lasting customer base because they built the connections, they formed the relationship with us, and they are still collectors today, a lot of them in many ways. So it was good timing and very gracious customer base. And I think everybody in that period of post 2020 was excited about handcrafted, encouraging things and were willing to take a chance on people and say like, it's okay.
I was just going to ask, what year was this?
Yeah, this was 2022.
Okay. So not exactly, in my brain, I was like, oh yeah, there was this little bubble of 2020, 2021 where everyone was like, yep, we get it. It's fine. And then like now I'm thinking like, is that still around? Has that worn off? Would that feeling be the same if it happened to somebody in 2025?
I don't know.
But I think human nature, I like to believe, at least as somebody who has encountered a wide variety of people on Etsy, especially, like on the whole, people are decent. Every once in a while, you get a couple people who clearly are having a bad day and it gets hit on you instead of wherever it actually is, because we sell mugs. This is not heart surgery.
Right.
But, yeah, I think maybe there was an extra amount of love in 2022, but I don't think it would be radically different.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you're right. At the end of the day, it's a luxury product that people can be happy they have. This isn't high stakes. So, yeah, we're really grateful there.
The only sense of urgency is like, oh, you wanted this as a birthday present and you didn't tell me when the birthday was. Like, okay, I get that. But we've also had people, we both got terribly ill leading into the holiday season last year and had orders that weren't yet fulfilled that couldn't get done. And I had to send out an uncomfortable message about that and I made a little design, put the graphic design skills to use and made a little PDF that was like a note from the North Pole and had a picture of the mug that would be being sent. And people were thrilled. They were like, yeah, this is great.
It's problem solving and relying on grace.
Indeed. But okay, so that was 2022. And I'm assuming that changed everything, to be dramatic.
It did. I had already at that point hired an assistant. So it just in the normal pottery studio side of things, I had already needed help. So I had an assistant working for me at the time. That became 2 assistants. And yeah, we figured out really quickly what works, what doesn't work as far as e-commerce goes. I mean, we had a level of experience coming from Clay King to say like, oh, this is how to set up a site. This is how to capture emails. This is how to funnel it all together and how to piece it into like a social media marketing network to reach more people. So it was definitely learning by error in the beginning, but with at least an understanding or a foundation of this is how it should function. The real big variable there was we're still making wheel thrown pots to order. And how do we cut out all of the frivolous excess that is costing us time or costing us energy or costing us money to be able to focus on the thing that is producing outsized returns. At the time leading up to that, I had been making all kinds of pots. I mean, I was just experimenting and having fun. But through that process and realizing my time is now constrained to having to fill all these orders, how can I make making a mug as simple and versatile as possible? So I cut out all glaze options except black and white. I made my own matte recipe that worked well with the gold decals we were using. And I could have 1 mug, 2 glazes, and as many different illustrations that I could put on the mug to create different SKUs. So that was kind of the first iteration of optimizing our product, like our core product, is figuring out, okay, this is the thing that works. This is how we can make it as diverse as possible. And we did that for another year or 2 until...
You were still hand throwing every single mug, though.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, I was just going to say, from a business jargon standpoint, in case anybody has never heard the word SKU word, I don't know, it's SKU. It's essentially the number of options that you had would be like the layman's terms of a SKU is basically the barcode on any item in a store. But, you're saying like you could actually have the perception of a variety of lot of items, but in the actual making process, more or less, it was the same.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying. I didn't mean to jump into logistic terms.
No, all good. My brain went right along with you, and I was like, oh, oops.
No, that's a good point. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, so I tried to diversify as much as I could within a very controlled framework. And I did have help, whether it was pulling handles. We did eventually switch to extruding handles or glazing or cleaning up and stamping the feet. It was still a very labor-intensive development. And I got as good at throwing as I possibly could over the next couple of years of doing that. We came out with a few different collections. I was still being inspired by stories and kind of like developed a audience of nerdy book lovers. I fit right along inside of, whether I spend a lot of time in marketing or business books. I come from a very core nerdy background. I mean, my free time, I go to live action role-playing events. I do medieval reenactment. So I'm in it. And yeah, so I slowly started incorporating new glaze colors and new illustrations to continue just broaden what we could do within the same throne form. It wasn't until I think it was the end of 2023, I had a conversation with Ryan and Becca on Wheel Talk podcast, where they were describing this process of upfronting their entire year's inventory in as condensed amount of time in January as possible. And I found that idea appealing, I can make all this stuff and just slog it out and then have 1 or 2 weeks of really condensed production. And then I can just live off that for the next year. That'd be great. So that kind of turned into that also social media took and ran with, and that became a community, engaged event. We called it 505 days, 505. So the goal was to make 500 mugs in 5 days. And then I would live off that for the next however long. In my head, I thought it would last a really long time. That was a very fun and productive week. I think that was probably the most output of mugs that I've ever had. I had also contracted shingles that week before.
What?
At the time, I didn't tell anybody that. Because it was a very public thing. I had said okay, we're doing this. And then people were like, oh yeah, we're doing it too. And I was like, okay, this is an expression of being uncomfortable so that we can have good results. And okay, I'm very uncomfortable right now, but I can't stop doing this because I am now experiencing the thing that I said we're going to work through.
I mean, there's different definitions of discomfort, but okay.
I guess. No, I didn't say anything about it at the time. I didn't tell anybody that I had that for another year. But we made 500 mugs, 5 days. It was done. Week ended. Success. And I quickly realized that my body cannot keep up with this level of output.
I was going to say the recovery time of that, pragmatically, as an efficient person, I love the concept.
Yeah.
But also the recovery time, I assume, negates some of the efficiency.
A little bit. Yeah, we did have the next couple of weeks were definitely slower in production mode. I mean, we had to glaze all the things, but it was less.
You also had to have the storage space to hold 500 mugs.
Yes. And although this might seem, you can't really get a full glimpse of my studio. I work out of a 300 square foot outbuilding. My house is 1,100 square feet. We're micromanaging every square inch. So it was a big logistical thing. Made it work. But I think at that point, coming off the tail end of that production run and that health issue, and my wrists were hurting, my back was hurting, I'm in my 30s. I can no longer keep up with this level of output and reach the goals that I want to make, which are ambitious. So I was actually Chris, owner of Clay King. We were driving to NCECA in Richmond that year. And he had told me once or twice before, if you're going to really start a business, you can't be doing the thing. You can't. You have to find a way around that. If you're going to make a thing that sells and you have these ambitions, then you can't be in charge of the thing that you're selling. At some
you're
level,
actually starting the business for. Yeah.
Yeah. At some level, you're going to have to get out of the like the little cog on the wheel, and you're going to have to start turning a bigger cog. It got me on the idea of finding help for production in some capacity. And it was at NCECA that year that we met, kind of bumped into the folks from Maryland, China, who were exactly that. They're production capacity partners for artists and ceramic businesses that needed to create custom designs. And so as a craftsman at heart, I was loath to approach that for a very long time. Getting over my body saying, you can't do this, and my ego being worn down enough to say, like, this actually, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't affect what people enjoy about what we're doing. And it was a lot of conversations with collectors. It was a lot of conversations with myself and a lot of conversations with other potters to say, like, if somebody helps you with production, it's not like you can still make pots. You just don't have to make all of the pots. And you can make the pots that you make even more meaningful because you're able to spend more time with them. So you can give people what they want and grow a business and still be able to create things and make an impact. You just won't be the smallest cog in the machine. And that, I think, eventually got through. So they helped produce, like, it was still our mug design. This is one of them. So we can still customize them pretty heavily. This is actually Donovan from Speedball did this design. I love it. It's perfect. But they helped us generate a mug form, and that became like our canvas of, okay, we have a canvas now. We have mini canvases. How can we decorate them? And so there still is a lot of hands-on with each piece, but it's less hands-on.
So just to clarify, does that mean you're getting like Bisqueware from like the third-party company and then it's getting sent to you? Or is it like was it like a mold that then you're slip casting? Or how does like the actual, like, how does it work, I guess?
Yeah. So, and this is an area where I'm okay with opening the door. This is a group of potters. We're all trying to do the same thing. And if you judge me because I outsource some of my production, I've lived the life of a production potter. Okay. I'm happy with that. So how it works is we design a form, we send it to the Maryland, China, and then they reproduce it with molds, and they can send back, well, they'll confirm it with samples, but they sent us both Bisqueware and finished glaze. So we gave them our glaze recipes, we gave them our clays, our preferences. This is the size, dimensions, really everything that we wanted, and they made it happen. So we get both Bisqueware and already finished pieces. And so that gives us the option to customize it with our own glazes or do fun things with like artist collaborators or internally. So we can create still unique forms, unique things, but it's not reliant on me to make every one. And I can spend more of my time managing a business, creating, like I love to draw. So a lot of the illustrations that go on the cups, like I draw each and every one of them. So I am still expressing a lot of artistic involvement with my business. And we still do wheel throw a ton of pots. I love to make pots that go and live inside of stories. So what we've done is really kind of start like an events like chapter of Donovan Pottery where we'll work off a theme, and then we will create an event that fits the theme or join an event that fits the theme. So for example, in February, we have a local business friend group here that runs medieval costuming and events, and they were hosting a 13th century War of the Barons reenactment, and we made medieval feastware for the whole event, like handmade goblets, plates, bowls, like everything that looks like it came out of 13th century England. And then we threw a feast, and it was a ton of fun. So we're still very involved in making.
And you'd never be able to do a project like that if you were trying to make 1,000 mugs a year.
Exactly.
To me, it actually sounds really similar to, as different as everybody's stories are, there's a through line of like the consistent thing over here that provides a certain amount of stability, a certain amount of like assurance, whatever, in order to open you up to have the fun and the creativity and the art. To even give a comparison that some people might think is like two totally different situations, somebody who, let's say, is a professor or teaches ceramics at the university level, who then makes their own pots on the nights and weekends, same concept. Lisa Orr and I talked about how she has house numbers on Etsy, of all places. Like, nobody thinks about Lisa Orr and Etsy in the same sentence, in my opinion. But she does, and she crushes it, and then gets to make these beautiful, living garden-inspired, pick a form, any form, right? Like butter dish, pitcher, teapot, whatever. Same thing still to me.
Exactly. That was what I came to, was I need to be able to fund the thing that I want to do. And I still want creative say over this other thing. Like, I don't want to work for somebody else to the end of days. And I want to be able to grow a business. I have this interest and I like being able to create. So how can I just do more of that? And this was a solution.
I also think it brings me back a little bit to, we kind of talked about the variety of subjects and things that you've been through. And we talked about, building a brand that is that quintessential number everybody talks about, like a 6-figure business, which like we can demystify that a little bit later.
Yes.
Because it sounds real fancy. And I'm assuming from both of us who have done it, like,
Yeah.
might not be everything you think it is.
Exactly.
I come back to this idea that Francesco and I talk about of like, what is enough, right? And like deciding like, what is the primary goal? If the primary goal is your hands in clay all the time, that business looks a lot different. And what you need to do with that looks a lot different than, if the goal is supporting multiple team members and an entire family and, and hitting whatever revenue goal that you have for yourself, regardless of 6 figures or multiples, whatever. Numbers are relative.
No, I love what you said about having a very precise goal, because I think that was where I languished a lot, especially after graduation, is that when I found clay, I had this, like, I remember telling my fiance at the time, now wife, I want to be a potter. Like, that's what I want to do. But that was it. Like, I didn't realize that wasn't narrow enough. It wasn't defined enough. And for a long time, my idea of what a potter was and should be was very disconnected from the reality that I needed. And there's a lot of different avenues to find the ways to get to the reality you need. But if I could go back and say to myself or to any other person who might be listening to this is, setting that really defined goal of what does realistic success look like for you, and being as explicit as possible would be very beneficial, I think. Because I think that would have saved me years of writing out a belief system that didn't actually support my reality.
Oh, yeah. I also don't know of how to avoid that pain point in the process of learning. Because at least for me, it was definitely a matter of like, mess it up and understand what didn't work in order to more clearly define, oh, this is actually what I want life to look like. Therefore, this is what business should look like, as opposed to throw everything at the wall, see what sticks, and run with whatever sticks, and that's going to be the business, and then wind up being like, oh, but wait, this isn't the life I wanted to have.
Yeah, there's that sense of failing forward that you have to go through, and there's maybe an equal place to have mentors and guidance that can help maybe mitigate a lot of that failing forward.
Yeah, to a point.
Yeah, to a point. In the end, we're going to fail. And
definitely what we're both here to try and help people do, but no promises.
Yeah, right. You're going to fail. You're going to figure it out. It's going to be different.
Maybe it just won't be like, it'll just be like a little stumble or a little trip as opposed to like a cliff.
Yeah. Or like a complete disassociation from ceramics or craft or art, or saying like, I'm done with this.
Or throwing 500 pots with shingles. I mean, I don't know.
I think I would do it again.
I would love, like, 500 pots in 5 days is just, period, that's fun and enjoyable, and it makes me think about, like, the Empty Bowls Throwathon and stuff that we participate in, which is super fun. But, like, the personal health side, I feel like my brain short circuits at that because I have pushed through so much pain that I'm trying to unlearn not doing that and, like, taking care of yourself. So I'm like,
Yeah, there is definitely a balance. And I would say a benefit in seeking that out probably 85 to 90% of the time. And I think there also is a benefit to seeking out discomfort in controlled ways, because I look back, like there's so many times, even the hard conversations I've had this week, where I feel enabled, empowered to do more difficult things because I've done difficult things. And I think there's a benefit to being able to look forward and say, I can do that because I did this. It's not copy paste for everybody, but if you can create a scenario where you have some semblance of control over the level of discomfort that you put yourself through, whether that's a daily gym routine or some crazy production goal during a health crisis. Whatever it is in between, I think is beneficial.
I agree completely. And it makes me actually think about, and I appreciate that shift in perspective, because I have a past mentor of mine who actually now runs a group called the Men and Women of Discomfort. And it's a coaching, on the surface, it seems like a personal training kind of, you want to lose whatever weight you want to lose. But that's kind of the marketing surface level of it, because underneath of it is way more like a personal coach level. To your point, if you voluntarily choose discomfort, like something uncomfortable is going to happen to any of us at any given time. Like that's just bound to happen. If you have practiced this skill already, the ability to manage when it comes accidentally or unplanned, you have that muscle, if you will. I've just merged a lot of metaphors.
No, I love it. And I think it works because I think it is a muscle.
Oh, 100%. Just like focus. Absolutely.
And the more you do it, the better you get.
I'm just maybe going to work on getting back into a running routine for discomfort and not throw pots with shingles.
Right. I mean, no, I wouldn't actually encourage anybody to do that. Running is a much better outlet for that kind of
and
level.
Equally as miserable. So, it'll get the point across.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to pause the conversation right here because, well, Will and I talked for over 2 hours, which is a bit longer than the average episode that you've probably come to expect here on the podcast. So part 2 is coming to you next week. We dive deep into demystifying what 6 figures actually means as a business owner versus what you actually get to take home as a salary, and how he's learned to use paid advertising strategically rather than as a quick fix many of us may see it as. Plus, we get into some great questions from our community members about managing viral moments and Will's approach to navigating copyright when creating fantasy-inspired work. So since this is a 2-parter, make sure you've hit subscribe or follow, whatever the button happens to say at the moment you are listening to this episode in whatever podcast app you're using, so you don't miss out on part 2 next week. Because trust me, the conversation only gets better from here. I hope this conversation with Will has started to shift how you think about what it means to build a sustainable business. That finding your specific audience isn't actually about limiting yourself, but instead giving yourself permission to make exactly what lights you up for the people who genuinely want it. And I get it. It can be really scary to feel like you're restricting yourself when you're still trying to find that ideal audience. Honestly, being a creative entrepreneur, whether you're side hustling or full-time, is full of scary decisions. Should you pivot your product line? Is it okay to raise your prices? When is the right time to invest in better equipment or hire an assistant? These are the kinds of questions that keep us up at night or searching Google for less than helpful answers. And they're exactly the conversations happening every day inside the community. It's a place where over 100 makers from around the world come together to figure out what version of this creative life actually works for their specific situation. Whether you're just starting to think about selling your work, or if you've been at this for years but feel stuck, or if you're maybe in between, wondering if it is time to make the leap to full-time. Inside of the community, you'll find fellow makers at each one of these stages. People who've been where you are and others who are figuring it out right alongside you. But don't just take my word for it.
Hi, I'm Alicia Hagen in New Mexico. I joined the community last year after leaving my teaching career to pursue becoming a full-time artist. The community has been so invaluable in my growth as a solo artist because I still feel like I have coworkers and people I can talk to about my struggles and successes. The quarterly masterclasses always teach me something I didn't know I was even supposed to know. I also absolutely love going to the live co-working sessions and the book club meetups where I can hang out in real time with other makers from all around the world. It is awesome. You can find me and follow my journey on Instagram at Alicia Hagen Art.
If you want to learn more about community membership and support the creation of this very podcast by becoming a member, visit makersplaybook.com/community. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this. Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Kirsty Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Maker's Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.